You know what, I didn't think I'd be talking about this game this soon.
So around this time last year, I did a pretty extensive look at the Resident Evil 2 Remake, which easily clocked in as my longest review I've ever made up to that point. I played the hell out of it when it first came out, like non-stop for a good couple months, just constantly playing through it, unlocking what I could, getting those S ranks on hardcore difficulty, then playing it again, trying my best to review it from as least as possible of a bias that I could muster. Long story short, I adored that game, and it quickly became one of my favorites in the series, if possibly tied as my favorite game in the Resident Evil franchise. It wasn't a perfect game as there were a few missteps along the way, but the good easily outweighed the bad as far as I was concerned. So after experiencing that beautiful gem that somehow didn't win one award at the Game Awards, like, really? You guys nominated for Best Game in 2019 but not even a throwaway award? Not even winning Best Sound Design? Seriously? But when it came to the core gameplay, it nailed it and finally properly merged that bridge between old and modern. And I couldn't wait to see what was gonna come next. Of course, the question was, what was gonna come next? Remake 3 or Resident Evil 8? And honestly, I felt it could've went either way, but despite the rumors that a Resident Evil 3 remake had been in development longer than what some of us thought, I still figured we wouldn't even be seeing a teaser for at least 2 years, if not longer, since Capcom seems to nowadays prefer announcing titles when they're getting close to their actual release dates. So with how well 2 did, it was a matter of when, not if we would see another remake. It just made too much sense due to how similar 2 and 3 are in a lot of ways. These games really are two sides of the same coin, but there's just no way they were developing these games side by side. But in December 2019, we got those leaked images. Then shortly after, that PlayStation State of Play Direct dropped, and well, expectations were just a little bit shattered there. There's no but how? It's too soon. I mean, come on, April 3rd? Even the originals didn't release that close to each other. Just a little over a year and we're already getting a remake of 3? Well, that set off some red flags, and the first thing I had to ask was this game being rushed to capitalize on popularity. Yeah, sure, that announcement trailer was tight, but I'm not an idiot. Games take time to make. And even if these two games can borrow a lot from each other, there's still a lot to cover and take in. Was this possible to be released this soon and still meet expectations? Well, everything leading up to the release was hitting all the right notes for me. The Nemesis trailer looked fucking terrifying and I was only watching. The developers had said they were taking more liberties with the plot this time, which was fine by me since the original definitely had some bumps in the road, and it honestly just looked like it was more of what I wanted. And hey, Project Resistance was being added as a bonus mode, which, I mean, it had a lukewarm reception at the kindest I can give it when it was first unveiled in the summer of 2019, but hey, I wasn't against the idea. If anything, it might have been answering that desire for my replayable bonus mode fix that I felt 2 was lacking. Though they still should have included the mercenaries. Just saying. And hey, if it sucked, well, I could just ignore it. The build-up for this remake was quick, but powerful. I was extremely hyped. I mean, hell, I even coughed up the money for that collector's edition, and I rarely do that for games, especially editions as bulky as this. Like, look at this fucking thing.
I mean, I won't lie, I was hyped beyond belief, but was Resident Evil 3 gonna be my dream game? Or was it gonna crush those dreams and expectations? Well, let's get into it.
So as many as you probably know, Resident Evil 3 takes place around the same time Resident Evil 2 does, just a day before and a day after, and it stars returning hero and Jill Valentine as she begins to make plans to leave the doomed city of Raccoon after all of her and her other star members' investigation falls on deaf ears. The night before she leaves, she gets a call from Brad, who panically calls her to get out of there as a hulking monster is coming after her, which, oh, it definitely does as it quickly busts through her apartment wall, just destroying the place in an attempt to love her to death in the most brutal stalker way ever. Shortly after, Jill runs into Brad, and then Brad kind of gets munched on and sacrifices himself to save her. So Jill runs off and the hulking beast continues to chase her. Hell, even survives getting hit off the roof with a fucking car. Then even catches a rocket shot at him by Carlos with his tentacle. Yeah, let's just say it now. That opening for the first time was amazing and really showed off just how much of a badass threat Nemesis really is. So after Carlos shortly saves Jill and reveals he works for the UBCS, a mercenary team hired by Umbrella to help save civilians, much to Jill's dismay for obvious reasons, they meet up with Mikhail, who asks for her help to get the subway station back up and going, which she begrudgingly agrees to. Which you can't blame the girl for being distrustful since Umbrella kind of made her life a living hell. And from there you get to explore the streets of Raccoon City in an attempt to escape from this nightmare. Now, I won't go into story spoilers since the game is kind of still fresh at the time of reviewing this, but if you've played Resident Evil 3 before, then you're gonna get the gist of how things play out. But unlike the Resident Evil 2 remake last year, this game definitely takes a lot more liberties and changes, which to be fair, the developers were upfront about when this game was announced, but holy hell, they definitely did. Last year, there were some debates about whether the Resident Evil 2 remake should actually be considered a reimagining, since there were a good amount of changes. I still feel it's a remake since they did still stay pretty faithful for the most part. Resident Evil 3 Remake though? Christ, this game barely even resembles the original sometimes with its changes, but I feel a majority of them were pretty good. Just some key ones really bogged down the experience, but we'll get to that when the time comes. In terms of character, just about anyone who had any bit of screen time were done good to phenomenal. In my opinion, this is the best Jill we've seen to date. There's so much character to her now. She's brash, she won't take shit from others, and not afraid to speak her mind on things. I also really appreciate that they delve into her psyche a bit this time, as she's depicted as having PTSD, shown by these little dream sequences where she sees herself and others as zombies. Considering these guys are supposed to be just ordinary people where their job is essentially being elite cops, to go through something that horrible as the mansion incident, I'd be more scared if it didn't affect these guys in some way. It's actually a bit jarring that it took the series this long to really put some light on this in one of the main games now that I think about it, but hey, better late than never, I guess. I always liked Michelle Ruff as Jill, but Nicole Tompkins did a really good job with this portrayal of the character, and I really hope she's the one to play Jill moving forward. I know that there are some fans that really wanted Julia Voth to return to be the face of the character again, but it hasn't happened for over a decade now. Not trying to shame or show disrespect to her. I'm sure she's a nice lady and clearly loves the character, but yeah, I mean, it's time to move on. Carlos though, holy hell did they reboot this character into something special. In the original I never minded him, but he was never one of my favorites, and if anything it made sense that he would fall into this well of Resident Evil protagonists who only appeared once, never to be seen again. But here, Carlos stole the show when it came to personality and lovability. He's a total bro, but that corny kind that's endearing. He'll crack those jokes very well knowing that it'll get under your skin, but in a playful, shit-disturbing way. You really get the sense that he'd be a blast to have a couple beers with, and generally a good guy who's just trying to do the right thing. That very first time I heard him comment about one of the doors in the RPD.
Now here's a weird fucking door.
It was like, yes, Carlos, that is a very weird fucking door. Thank you! And it's nice to see somebody in the series actually comment on the absurdity of some of these structures for a change. To me, he reminds me of the levity Parker brought to Resident Evil Revelations, so that the story wasn't doom and gloom the whole time. And guess what? Parker was also one of the few highlights of that story too. Both really need to come back for future games. I mean, hell, Carlos would fit right in as a BSAA member. Nikolai is about as one-dimensional as he's always been. A greedy murderer who would push his own mother off a cliff if meant he'd profit off of it. But it's definitely a lot more in your face this time around. This guy is a fucking prick and he's not afraid to show it. And it was fun to watch in my opinion. It would be fun to see him come back in a future game so that the series could actually have a reoccurring villain besides Wesker for a change. I loved his performance. He was like an old school Disney villain and that was refreshing to see for a change if I gotta admit. The other side characters were pretty good too. Brad, while he wasn't in this game for long, I did enjoy the new take for him since this time they gave him a bit of a redemption arc. As in the first game, he basically abandoned his team to die, but now he manned up and actually sacrificed himself for Jill's sake. And I won't spoil it here, but there's this one scene with him that's just so damn chilling. Anyone who's played knows exactly what I'm talking about. I love that scene. I know some don't like the change they made to his death as they feel in the original. Brad getting impaled by Nemesis really set the tone that this guy is an unstoppable machine targeting only star members, but I feel this is going to be an apples to oranges topic. Either you're going to love the change or hate it. Not wrong either way since both shine in their own way in my opinion. The rest of the cast did a pretty decent job too. Mikhail was fun to watch, just wish we got more of him. And Tyrell, while I didn't think he stood out or anything, still was a decent performance, plus hey, at least he actually got to do things this time around. Now, when it comes to locations you explore, while I do wish the city was a little bigger, as well as the lab in the end of the game, I do enjoy what is here though. The streets actually look like city streets this time around, none of that long alleyway landscape crap this time. And I adore how vibrant it looks, all the lighting and neon signs. It's a spectacle to look at, showing off just what this engine can do. The sewers, well, I mean, it's okay. It's over before you know it, so I don't have too much to comment on. But the RPD though, oh my god. Like I mentioned, I'm a sucker for when games will revisit past areas for different games, but in a different perspective. And while yeah, it sucked that it wasn't Jill who comes here, like I mentioned earlier, Carlos's reactions to everything here was top notch. And I love the world building connections they made between these two games here. Whether it was hearing what Carlos had to say about different things in the RPD, seeing events unfold that went unexplained when Leon and Claire made it there, hell, even the breakable crates in this game. At first I thought nothing of it, if anything it was like, oh, they just reused the crates from Resident Evil 7. Kinda lazy honestly, but then it dawned on me. Carlos just smashed open these crates to get to the items, leaving these busted pieces of wood scattered for Claire and Leon to use later when they boarded up the windows. That's fucking ingenious! All around, I loved the RPD section of the game. If anything, I just wish it was a little bit longer. Then we come to the hospital, and this is easily the best part of the game for me. It might not have been as big as the RPD in full in Resident Evil 2, but you explore this area in a pretty similar way, and its atmosphere was perfect as it slowed the pace down just enough to let the horror feel really sink in. And then we have the lab setting, which replaces the Dead Factory in the original. Some won't like this change as they feel another lab setting robs this game of a unique setting, and while I can agree on that aspect, I don't mind it since I've always been neutral on the Dead Factory. I never hated it, but it was never my favorite location for this game or the series in general. Nest 2 on the other hand, I did enjoy its aesthetic, since while yes it's another lab setting, and sure it could have been bigger and longer in my opinion, shut up, I do appreciate how streamlined it was compared to the Nest in Resident Evil 2 where everything felt segregated and had those long hallway syndrome parts connecting each area. I guess in the end both Nests had their pros and cons I suppose. In terms of graphics, this game is just as beautiful as last year's release. I mean, it only makes sense. Running on the same engine being developed at the same time, it's gonna look alike. And for these two, I think it helps it more than it would hinder in other titles. But if I was to be honest, I think Resident Evil 3 does edge it out a little bit since things are a bit more vibrant this time around. The choices in color really help sell that the city wasn't in complete ruin yet. There are still people trying to survive and escape the city, while Resident Evil 2's more muted color tones help sell the desertedness of the city by the time Leon and Claire make it through. It's subtle, but it's a nice touch in my opinion. And then we had the music. Yeah, we actually have music this time around. Holy shit. This was a godsend as they actually remixed some of the tracks and it's great to hear. One of Resident Evil 2's bigger letdowns last year was indeed its music, or should I say mostly lack of. I know they were going for a more atmospheric tone last time, but looking back, no wonder they locked the classic music option behind DLC. I only played through it once with the remake music, and I have no intention of ever switching back, except for maybe for Survivor. So definite improvement when compared to last year. But that's the story, character, locations, and technical elements. And for the most part, it was just as good as Resident Evil 2 in this department. In some cases, like the music and subtle touches to graphics, it was even better. For what was presented here, they did an amazing job and I look forward to seeing what this team and engine can do in the future. But let's actually move on to the gameplay now. So in terms of control mechanics, it's nearly a one-to-one copy and paste from Resident Evil 2 Remake, which really as it should be. It felt familiar, but also a bit more intuitive with the little changes they made. But the team made sure to add a few quality of life and balancing improvements to make it feel a bit more polished, even though it definitely threw my muscle memory for a loop when the first time I played the demo due to how much I played the second remake. Which also, thank Christ they got rid of that one-time play 30-minute timer. That was just so fucking stupid when people were just making all the counts anyway. I'll never understand that one. Anyway, the most obvious addition to your arsenal of moves is the dodge mechanic for Jill that first debuted in the original, this time being based around Revelations 2's version, which I was grateful to see. Revelations 2 easily had the best dodge up to that point, and to see them expand on this version of dodging was definitely a treat. Now, if you time it just right, Jill will do a perfect dodge and give her a chance to get a few free shots on the enemy's weak spot. Carlos, on the other hand, got a little Royfield on us, and he will actually counter enemy attacks with a punch when he times it right, or will shoulder charge into enemies otherwise. This was perfect in my opinion. It gave players something to really master since it does take a little bit of time to learn that sweet spot timing on each enemy, but didn't make us go through that weird gimmicky style of dodging attacks like in the original, and ironically enough, Revelations 1. It's getting kinda scary how close this game feels to Revelations 2 in some regards. The only thing I don't really like about it is that it takes over the buttons that you'd use to quick turn in the Resident Evil 2 remake, at least in the control type setting I was using, which was C. That was definitely a big hurdle to get past, but again, muscle memory, you know what I mean? Not a big deal, but figured I'd bring it up. I feel like they probably could have did a different button prompt for it, and let the way quick turn worked in Resident Evil 2. Though I do realize this is a massive nitpick and I certainly wouldn't consider it if I was doing a rating system. And by the end, it did feel second nature once more. The other major change for Jill and Carlos is that they aren't allowed to use sub-weapons as defense items anymore, which was to help promote the returning button prompt to break a grab faster for less damage, as well as the dodge mechanic in general. This was honestly a bit of a head scratcher when I first heard about it. Why take out a feature that people wanted back since, like forever? And not to mention, it was a really good feature in general. Well, of course, even after playing the demo for a couple days, it did end up making more sense. But also, I really grew to adore this change since I feel like the developers didn't act it due to laziness, but a conscious decision. Why do I think that? Well, two main reasons. The first one being simply that the button mash prompt helps convey the more tense feeling to completely complement the higher action focus this game has. The other reason is I truly believe they made this kind of little gameplay difference to really show that yeah, Jill and Carlos are more seasoned veterans being able to adapt to combat the threat better compared to Leon or Claire, who definitely feels a bit basic to play as in comparison. It all kind of feeds into each other. Jill might not have the ability to use items for defense simply because why would she if she's strong enough to get them off quicker? Plus, I would like to think that these two are more seasoned, and they wouldn't just throw their knives and grenades away like that since you're in a city. You don't have a department full of knives all over the place here. Even the way Jill handles her knives can also bleed into this little attention to detail. Jill doesn't swipe her knife like Leon and Claire did. Instead, she'll actually stab her enemies, which is not only a great callback to Resident Evil 5 and Revelations 1, since she was the only one who stabbed in those games too. Plus, I also love the fact that Jill and Carlos handle their knives differently, as Jill will stab it, alongside being able to do this interesting dodge stab element, while Carlos does opt to swipe his knife similar to how Leon and Claire did it. Mix this in with how their dodge and counters work, and it really makes these two feel that much more different to play as, even though in most cases, while they're still pretty similar, it's just enough to make them feel completely different. Which to me is a great improvement since Claire and Leon had no unique attributes to them, just exclusive weapons. It really does make those two feel so basic in comparison. But as this horse keeps getting beat, it does convey how much more trained these two are compared to the rookies, all the while balancing the knife so it wasn't so exploitable this time around. You can't easily stun lock zombies on the ground anymore, and you even gotta master Jill's ability to possibly do a little backstep stab so that the zombies aren't gonna latch onto you as they're getting up, since now they'll always attempt to approach you as they're getting up to their feet. Only thing I don't care about it is sub-weapons like the knife or the grenade don't have their own specific button to use on them anymore, since they're technically not sub-weapons anymore. For over-the-shoulder Resident Evil style, to not have the knife have its own button prompt just felt all sorts of wrong after all these years. Not a game breaker by any means, but now I kinda know how one feels about the modern control scheme in the remake and Resident Evil 0 remaster. But I can't stress enough, any cons in this segment are nothing more than nitpicks. It was not long until it became second nature to me. And really, it just feels so much better to play in my opinion. Even little things like the guns feeling like they have a bit more oomph than before, or not having to go to the inventory screen every time you pick up an item. Now you'll just automatically pick up the item you've already picked up in the past, as long as you have enough space. On the map, it'll still show you any items you missed, but they're white icons now to make it easier to see what kind of item it is. And to discard item icon once an item has served its purpose as a trash can now, instead of a checkpoint, making it clear that you can get rid of it. I know very well some people were thrown off guard with that check mark at first. And the inventory screen is a lot bigger and easier to see this time, which I feel is a bit more practical. Resident Evil 2's might be more stylish in its smaller yet more elegant approach, but realistically, it could have been a bit bigger to make it easier on the eye so you're not squinting sometimes. So other than the things I brought up before, the only nitpick I can make on a technical aspect is that it isn't as gory as it was in the Resident Evil 2 remake. And yes, I know I shouldn't be comparing these two games, but it's kind of inevitable, you're gonna do it. You can still dismember zombies, but you couldn't turn them into ground beef like you could before. This was a byproduct of there being a lot more to contend with, and especially on the harder unlockable difficulties. There's so many zombies at once, but hey, if it meant for a smoother and better experience in terms of gameplay, you know what? I'll deal with it. In the end, it probably was the best change they could have made for it. Speaking of zombies though, let's actually talk about the enemies for a bit. So returning enemies from last year are, well, zombies, which pretty much act the same, just not as bullet spongy, and like I mentioned, they won't be stun locked with the knife. They definitely felt more traditional, I guess is the best word to use, as you're not going to unload an entire clip into them and still have them get up. The Cerberuses make a return, and hey, I actually said it right this time, holy shit. Though they only appear a couple times, usually in front of these generators that you can shoot the shock enemies. Oh yeah, environmental hazards make a return, like the red oil drums, which have a huge area effect. It's probably a little too big if you ask me, it's kind of jarring when you first see it. But yeah, totally didn't forget to mention them, and totally didn't add them into the script at the last minute. Anyway, the Lickers also make a return for the RPD section, which I thought was really nice, since they didn't appear in the original, and hell, they even show up in the hospital on harder difficulties. And then even these things make a return. The fucking Paleheads. Yeah, I definitely wasn't too originally thrilled when I saw them come back, considering the amount of shit they gave me in Ghost Survivors last year. Essentially, they are faster zombies that can regenerate health quickly if you don't put them down with a strong weapon right away. Ugh, man, I thought they were going to be hell after the bad experience that I had in the past with them. But surprisingly, they aren't too bad this time around, since you're given the tools needed to combat them properly. Plus, to be honest, they actually fit that final area naked zombie trope really well. They were a pleasant surprise in the end, if I have to be honest here. A complete 180 to what I thought of them last year. New enemies this time around are these things that Nemesis is shown to attach to a zombie's head, making them a lot more durable and harder to kill. Plus, now they have a ranged tentacle attack to keep you on your toes. Hell, the first time I saw one of these fuckers on a Palehead, I nearly shit my pants. Definitely a rocket launcher to the face on that wonderful meeting the first time I saw it. I have no regrets. Next up were the Drain Demos. These are huge cricket-looking bug things that scurry all over the power plant section, running up and down walls and lunging at you to attack. Unfortunately, they're not as threatening as they originally were. Well, that is until shown through a cutscene that they can inject parasites into Jill in a really gross way. And the only way to get rid of the said parasites inside of you before it kills you is by ingesting a green herb, which the game gives you right before you enter their den. Yeah, it's cool to see them make a return, and not to mention it did add some good enemy variety, but they are very underutilized since they only appeared here, and their parasite attack didn't always happen. In fact, I've still never had them inject me outside of this one cutscene. It's a shame, really. But what wasn't underutilized were the hunters, as both Gammas and Betas came back and got some pretty awesome redesigns. You first run into the Gammas in the sewers, and these suckers are huge, and can swallow you instantly if you get too close. Though while intimidating at first, once you learn its weakness, it's actually kinda laughable at how weak they actually are. Still though, I love their new designs, and it's an insta-kill enemy. That's always going to provide a little bit of tension when they do show up. Later on in the hospital section, Carlos will come across beta hunters, and hands down, these are the best versions of the hunters we have ever seen to date. No longer are they tumor-riddled nuisances, but now they are the most threatening and dangerous we have ever seen in the entire species. They're quick, they can take a lot of punishment until you get acid rounds, and can dole out the punishments too with their quick attacks. And much like the good old days, they sport their own insta-kill swipe, and they do it often, easily making them the most dangerous enemy in the game. Well, I should say, most dangerous normal enemy. I just wish they showed up more. It's such a rush to time a perfect counter and send these fuckers on their ass with Carlos. Though, to be fair, it's easily the reason why I racked up so many deaths on my first run. That instant kill move took me out constantly, and it was just this one right here. I could just not kill the prick for whatever reason. But yeah, I had my revenge with Jill later, motherfucker. But then we finally come to the star of the show, and the big guy himself, Nemesis. And, you know, I don't want to sound predictable, but it's been such a long time since I've loved, yet be so disappointed for an element of a video game this much. So much like the original, you'll be coming across Nemesis quite a bit as Jill. There will be plenty of instances where he'll try and come and ruin your day. Either it's a scripted weird quick time event, if I can even call it that. Like in the apartment, there's the scene where he'll try and smash you with this huge piece of concrete, which is amazing to watch as it's intense as fuck. That is, until you realize all you have to do is push up on the joystick. Or in the car scene, you push R2 a few times. I mean, I get that they probably didn't want the same backlash Resident Evil 6 had, where the game was riddled with them, where that if you failed, it was instant death until they patched most of them out. But it's still so weird that most of these take like no effort whatsoever. But I guess I'd rather have that than it be frustrating, I guess. Especially in a game where the game ranks you for how quickly you can go. Then you have his boss fights and the one specific moment where he goes after you with his rocket launcher. These are hands down some of the best parts of the game that really challenge you to put your skills to the test. As you would expect, he doesn't fuck around too much and he will take the fight to you. All of his boss fights are top notch. Whether it's his flamethrower battle where he'll come at you with different attacks or even try and use it as a club once you break his fuel container. It actually kind of reminds me of the Bowser fight from Mario 64 a little bit now that I think about it. Or even later on when you face off against his second form a couple times where he'll curb stomp you on higher difficulties. He is so quick and will run all over the place. People compare him to a Bloodborne enemy. Hell no, this bastard's a licker on steroids that Chris takes himself. Like, look at that fucking thing. All of his boss fights are top notch, well, except for maybe his final fight on the 2 highest difficulties. The guy can go fuck his hat with his stun locking bullshit. But hey, I don't know, maybe some of the Dark Souls feel of it. I personally don't. It can go fuck its hat on those difficulties. But oh man, that section where he comes after you with his rocket launcher. It's easily, and I mean easily, one of the most tense and most high-octane moments of the game. The guy is a fucking monster who just won't let up. Like I said, it's easily one of the best parts of the game in my opinion. And then we come to what most people were hyped for. His pursuit or stalker-like mode, similar to how Mr. X was in the RPD section of Resident Evil 2. This aspect of Nemesis was definitely the thing that and I'm sure most people were looking forward to the most. Mr. X set the bar pretty high last year. What with his constant boots? Oh my god. What with this constant boot stomping and Terminator-like vibe? Can you believe that took me like 20 tries to fucking say that? God, I love recording, but Jesus Christ, it can be a pain in the ass sometimes. Anyway, as he relentlessly stalked almost entirely of the RPD, looking to kill you. So that obviously set some expectations. Clearly Nemesis was going to be doing that at some point, just on steroids. And to the developer's credit, when Nemesis is pursuing you like this, he is an improvement in just about every way possible. He's faster, he'll run after you to close the gap. He'll not only try and hit you, but multiple times, usually comboing his attacks, not letting you get a chance to recover. He'll do this roar to stun you. He'll use his tentacles to wrangle you back in if you try to get away. He'll even dart and jump past you as if he was a Dragon Ball fucking Z character. The team really did nail this aspect, or I guess mode in Nemesis, to make him feel like this was a ferocious, unbeatable machine, yet still get rewarded for taking him down temporarily with item crates that usually give you gun upgrades, which, oh yeah, those make a return. And you know what? Thank you for making it a return. It's actually nice to actually go against this guy and get something out of it for your efforts. But anyway, the best way I could describe the difference between Mr. X and Nemesis is, Mr. X searches for you, Nemesis hunts you. And when he does, it's amazing, and it's just everything I would expect from essentially an upgraded version of the fedora-wearing Tyrant. But And that's a really big but, since this is the keyword when Nemesis pursues you like this, and unfortunately, he only really does this once in the entire game. In fact, if you were thorough and taking your time to get everything in the city section of the game, you could potentially limit this one-time occurrence down to about 5 minutes or so. And unfortunately, I feel this has led to this unfair criticism that Nemesis sucks because he's 100% scripted now, unlike the original. And while yes, technically he wasn't 100% scripted in the original, but most cases he was though. No, the real issue is that I and other people were expecting him to pursue in his stalker mode more than he actually did. Again, for better or worse, Mr. X blew up the community for a reason, and to not see Nemesis get more time in his stalker mode akin to Mr. X easily hurts this game by a large margin. Ironically, I think the demo might have did more harm than good here, because it completely spoiled the most hyped potential aspect of this new version of Nemesis. Like, yeah, it was awesome to experience that for the first time, but to find out that the demo was actually showing off pretty much the only time he was going to actually be like this in the game, it was definitely a what the fuck, really? Kind of moment there. Now, to be fair, the argument was brought up a few times last year that if they made it where Nemesis was constantly hunting your ass like Trenchy did, then the appeal would wear off quickly and most likely become more annoying than actually scary. Which I agree would have been probably overkill, but for such a hyped up element by the fans, you'd think they would have had him in pursuit mode more than, well, fucking once. But I truly believe this has more to do with Resident Evil 3's more controversial issue, and maybe this problem of Nemesis feeling underutilized could have been prevented in the first place if this didn't happen. And yeah, I've been ignoring it long enough. Resident Evil 3 is a pretty short game, with sections like the city feeling a bit too short compared to the original, as well as sections like the memorable clock tower being cut out entirely, outside of tributes in-game and outside of acting as a boss arena. But, and another big but there, in terms of Resident Evil series itself, the length, while a bit on the shorter side, still, its campaign is around the same length of some of the other games in the series. On standard difficulty, it took me about 5 hours and 23 minutes to complete this game for the first time going in blind. Though, that doesn't count cutscenes as you can see in the top, so for the first time playthrough, it's around a 6.5 hour experience. For others, it could vary give or take on skill. And to be fair, that's almost around the same length of my original playthrough of Resident Evil 2 on Claire's first run. So in its own bubble, it's not that far off. In fact, if you were to compare the maps from the original to the remake, they're surprisingly pretty similar in size. Just this remake streamlined things so well that the game's pace feels like it's sometimes on breakneck speed. But in some ways, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. No part of this game ever felt like it overstayed its welcome, though to be fair, I wish some parts were longer. And right when I felt like I was starting to get bored with the scenery or pace, the game did make sure to change it or pick it up. As much as I loved Resident Evil 2 last year, there were parts that I just wanted to get through as quickly as I could on repeat playthroughs, because I didn't really care for them that much, like Sherry's section or the sewers for example. And again, to this game's credit, it really does want you to play through it multiple times after you beat it the first time. You'll unlock the shop where you can buy stuff for future playthroughs, with points you earned from the goals this game wants you to complete, such as the ability to use Jill Starr's outfit, which was awesome to see come back. And you can buy her some fun weapons to use like the flame knife called the Hot Dogger, or the traditional infinite rocket launcher. There's items that can give Jill more health or defense when it's held. There's Chris's manual that'll let you perform the perfect dodge more easily. Hell, you can even buy the bolt cutters and lockpicks so you can get some of the items earlier if you want. I mean, Christ, even after you beat the game on hardcore difficulty, you'll unlock nightmare difficulty I've mentioned a couple times, where it'll change most item placements and will completely rearrange enemy placement, with the highlights being the RPD section, and that part where the developers ingeniously use a zombie to act as a blockade for a door, forcing you to go the other way around to get there. This easily was a great addition Resident Evil 2 lacked. I mean, Christ, even after that you unlock an Inferno difficulty, which is even harder. As much as I appreciated the fact that Resident Evil 2 had 4 different versions of its campaign, at the end of the day, outside of those key differences, all 4 playthroughs pretty much had you doing the same thing and seeing the same thing with no change up when it came to difficulty outside of damage taken. But at the end of the day, that doesn't excuse some of the things they cut here. The big ones were the cut locations, specifically the clock tower. It was easily one of the most iconic parts of the original, hell, even part of the series in general. And now it's just totally gone, which the game even teases you exploring a bit before Jill gets infected. That was definitely a bit of a prick move when you really think about it. Now, to be fair, Resident Evil 2 Remake had cut things too, like extreme battle mode, a legitimate A-B scenario, but they at least tried to make up for it in different ways. While it did feel unfinished, Second Run at least tried to be Game B, and while I didn't care for it too much, those survivors did try to make up for there not being an extreme battle mode. Not to mention Tofu mode getting 5 loadouts to play as. Sadly, Resident Evil 3 doesn't really get to do this consistently. I mean, I'm glad the hospital was expanded upon a bit. In fact, it easily became my favorite part of the game. Yes, even that Horde mode segment. Sue me for liking things that remind me of 4 and 5 while it's considered a sin to like those elements right now. But as much as I enjoyed the stuff they changed or expanded upon, no matter how big or small, the cut sections like the park or especially the clock tower would have helped make this campaign feel much more complete. And like I said at the beginning, it also doesn't help that Mercenaries was completely removed. Sure, it's never been my favorite version of the mode, but it still would have been amazing to see a return of the Mercenaries since it's been like 8 years now. And while I don't really miss it, live selection was completely cut out, which wasn't the biggest loss since it usually didn't amount to much of a change, but it could have helped the replay value a bit more if the game would have let you experience things a bit differently with the story each playthrough. In the end though, the cut locations were the biggest hit for this game in my opinion, alongside the city section feeling so short. As I mentioned, the city in both versions are actually pretty similar in size. It just feels shorter because you're not backtracking through these long narrow alleyways now in the city. And with the demo showcasing about 3/4 of what's seen in the actual city section, I think that threw a lot of people for a loop, me included. I'm not gonna lie, even I was disappointed at first when I started really comparing the remake to the original. If anything, it made me wish I didn't even play the demo since it felt like I spoiled things a bit there. Then to find out that we don't explore the clock tower? That sucked. There's no other way to put it. Not to mention the lack of real puzzles this time around, like, how the fuck do you do that? How do you screw that up so much? The original had some of the most challenging but fair puzzles in the entire series. Now they are just as laughable as the original Resident Evil 2 puzzles were. That just feels so backwards. To me, if they would have expanded on the city a bit more and included the clock tower where you actually explored it for like an hour or so, then right there, they could have fixed the Nemesis feeling underutilized issue since he would have had more places to explore and more time to be in stalker mode. Honestly, at this point, I'm convinced this was originally going to be DLC for Resident Evil 2 at one point. It just makes too much sense in my opinion. The length of this game, the cut content, the fact that Capcom dropped support for Resident Evil 2 about a month after release, which for big successes like Resident Evil 2 are, that never happens with Capcom. Look at Resident Evil 7, 2 full DLC campaigns, one of them being free mind you, and a ton of extra stuff. What did Resident Evil 2 get? 4 cheaply made what-if scenarios that were basically just more forced survivor levels, and 2 retro polygon costumes for Leon and Claire? I can guarantee these 2 remakes will be turned into one game for future releases. But until that happens, if Capcom was smart, hopefully they do have some legitimate DLC coming for this game. Add the Mercenaries, add some story DLC, and most of these issues people have with the game right now may be redeemed. Because despite this controversial cloud hanging over the game right now when it comes to length and content, I still love the game, and will be sure to play it for years to come. It's still a great remake, reimagining, whatever the hell you want to call it, and it's an amazing companion piece to the Resident Evil 2 remake that I couldn't recommend enough. Honestly, when the game's biggest problem is that it left me wanting more, that's the sign of a great game. Just it needs that extra oomph to push it into the awesomeness the first 2 remakes have to their name. With that being said though, do I recommend you buy this game? Well, that's tricky because it comes down to what kind of player you are, and what you're looking to get out of it. Don't forget, this does come bundled with Resistance, an online competitive game, which I do talk about in the following episode, so you can get my thoughts on that there. I mean, Christ, this episode went long enough as it is, but anyway, if you're a player who generally only plays a game once or twice and never touches it again, well, you might want to wait for a price drop on this one. Or say you will do everything this game has to offer, but for whatever reason you won't play Resistance. Either it's just not your cup of tea, or you're in that group that you're dead set against the game no matter what. Well, you gotta decide if Resident Evil 3 on its own will be worth it or not. Cause like it or not, for new or digital copies, if you decide to spend full price and ignore half your purchase, well sorry, but that's honestly on you. But if you're excited about this game and open-minded about Resistance, then I say definitely without a doubt buy this game. You'll have a good time. Even Resistance, while rough around the edges at the moment and having a lot to take in at first, it's surprisingly addictive after you put the time in and level up. But that's just me, as well as a topic for next time. So that was Resident Evil 3 Remake, or Reimagined. In my opinion, it's still a great game and a must-have as a companion piece alongside the Resident Evil 2 Remake. Which, like I said, I guarantee moving forward when these games get re-released in the future, they're gonna be bundled as one game. And you know what? I'm good with that. It's not perfect by any means, and yes, it sucks that there's cut content, and it does feel so short, but like I said at the beginning, I don't think I've liked the game as much as I have with the Resident Evil 3 Remake, but be completely dumbfounded by some of the decisions made here. It's not perfect by any means. Even if we compare it to the first 2 remakes, it doesn't even come close. But don't forget, those 2 set extremely high bars, and those are huge shoes to fill since both are considered by many to be 2 of the best remakes ever made in any medium. The fact that this game turned out as well as it did, and only being out a little over a year after the Resident Evil 2 Remake released, that's something to be commendable in my opinion, since the game has 3 games it was going to have to be compared to, the 2 remakes as well as its original. It didn't have the benefits Resident Evil 2 got last year in terms of freshness, but to ignore its major flaws would be disrespectful, and I won't ever try to ignore it no matter how much I may like this game. Hopefully they do have more plans for this game. I would love to see more DLC. In fact, this is probably one of the few times where Capcom should be doing DLC for this game. Don't let it be like Resident Evil 2 Revelations Raid Mode, where the game kind of needed DLC, but then you just never supported it after that.
In the end, though, I can't really pretend like I'm so torn that it ruined the whole experience for me. In its own little bubble, Resident Evil 3 Remake is a great time. I don't know, maybe I'm still in that honeymoon period with the game right now, but if I had to compare Leon, Claire, and Jill's scenarios, Honestly, I might have to give it to Jill right now. Maybe that opinion can change, but who knows? See what happens in a year's time from now if the game gets any DLC or not. But I think I'm definitely done talking now. This has gone on for way longer than what I expected it to. I mean, hell, I even cut out a whole section of the video. But you know what? That's the price, I guess. So you guys have a great day or night or whenever the hell you watch this, and I'll catch you next time.